You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Our conversation is about beyond, don't cheat, redefining AI literacy for the next generation. This is such a fun and unique episode for Bart and I. Today's guests are Conor Grennan, Chief AI Architect at NYU Stern School of Business and CEO of the AI Mindset.ai. He is a best-selling author, and along with him is a 16-year-old son, Finn, who brings the student perspective into the AI conversation.
This was so much fun. I mean, to have a dad and his son talking about AI and to be talking about it from a student perspective, from a parent perspective, from a professor perspective, from a business owner perspective. Man, we cover so many bases on this. And this is one of my favorite episodes we've done, especially on AI. And so it's so great to hear Conor talk about, because he is, consulting with Microsoft. He's consulting with a lot of the big corporations, and I follow him on LinkedIn. That's how I got connected with him, and I just have been so impressed with what he's doing. But also knowing that he's in the education space, and he's been helping schools think through things too. And so they both go in and talk about how they're approaching it personally, but how they're also approaching it at Finn's school, and how they're approaching it at different colleges and universities. And so it's a fun episode, and I'm glad you're here today to listen to it.
I must say, Conor is famous, but Finn is so impressive representing students and young people his age. They offer a unique father-son perspective on how AI is shaping literacy. So without further ado, here is Conor and Finn Grennan. We always start by asking our guests to share something interesting or surprising they may have learned recently. So, Conor and Finn, what's something that each of you may have discovered or learned lately that might be a surprise to our audience?
So, I think for me, this is Conor talking, in case this is an audio medium for you guys. I think for me, the surprising thing about AI for me lately is that it's impossible to tell who's going to be very good at it. I think it's just always surprising to sort of see the person in the back of the room who was always shunning AI all of a sudden to be like unbelievable at it. So that's my big surprising thing. Finn?
Yeah, my big surprising thing is just to kind of set the background up here a little bit. When AI first came out in November 2022, it was immediately banned in schools, as I'm sure you guys know and all the listeners know. And so I just immediately assumed all teachers kind of hated AI, thought of it as the root of all evil, which makes logical sense, right? It's like, oh, they went to college. They don't want to be grading an essay written by a machine. They want to be actually teaching these kids. Right. But now, especially in the more recent couple of weeks, as I've been working with my school, I've realized teachers really do want to use AI. They really think it's amazing. They think it's a great tool. I think they're just not using it because they're more scared of how it's going to be used.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Finn, and you kind of lead into the first question that we would like to ask of both of you. I think I'm going to pose it to Conor first, that schools can be found on all sides of the AI conversation, and many frame AI as a threat to academic integrity. In your work, you flip that and saying AI literacy is really about behavior, mindset, and discernment. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think one of the big surprising things to me as we discovered what this thing was, as Finn was saying, kind of it came out almost 3 years ago now, amazingly. I think that the initial thought on it, and I think that a lot of people still think this, is that it's something that you really have to learn, like there's a learning curve to it, because that's everything we've done in school, everything that, we're sitting here, and a lot of your audience will have gone through just a tremendous amount of learning, whatever that subject is. And the really startling thing I think that we discovered was that there's actually not really much to learn. It's really much more of a behavioral shift, meaning that the only thing you really need to know is how to talk like a person. I don't think there's a ton of different, prompt tricks or tips or anything like that. So it's much more like trying to get on a treadmill rather than trying to learn calculus. And I think that this is something that, for me, was really startling, but also has led to AI adoption, I think, being really slow in schools as well. And I think that, especially in an academic setting, we're so used to the rubric of, okay, we have to learn this thing. Right. So how do we learn this? And then once we study, then, and instead, it's much more like, okay, how do we shift our behavior? How do we shift our thinking? Because there's not really anything to learn. It's just doing it. And that was really startling to me.
Yeah, I think you're right, Conor. And I think what's interesting is that I do a lot of work with higher education and work especially at the administrative level. So whether it's vice presidents for enrollment or whether it's the presidents or different levels of the C-suite. And I often find that is one of the areas that they struggle with. I mean, I try to teach the mindset first, which I know you do as well, before we get into actual skills, because if you don't have that mindset, if you don't see it as a partner and you see it as something that I can type in and get exactly what I want out, you're going to fail. You're going to get mad and angry. I also find that many times, because it is something that came from a computer, people think that, oh, we just need to get that to IT. Just have IT take care of that. And again, that's something, maybe speak to that for a second, because I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of administrators, and we have a lot of presidents that listen to this podcast. And so I want to kind of frame it for that, is that sometimes that's one of the first mistakes we make, is just to push it down the line like we do any other piece of software. And I think that's a danger.
No question. I would say I can hardly improve on what you just said. I guess one thing I would just add is that I work a lot with large organizations as well. And the very first thing I say is that this looks like a digital transformation, but it doesn't behave anything like a digital transformation. Meaning, like, a digital transformation is sort of, we've all gone through it, right? It's like, at the very base level, it's like moving from fax machines to email, or like, whatever that system is. And I'm sure if you're in academia, we've gone through a lot at NYU where you move from an old system to a new system. People don't really want to do that. And that's a system where you just, you put in a new system, you train everybody up, and then you burn down the old system because everybody prefers the old system, and you have to make them do it. And then that's it. Then everybody's progressed. This is much more like change management. And it's important to say that, because when you're talking in a school, as we do at Finn School at St. Luke's in New Canaan, Connecticut, there's a lot of movements to sort of say, like, hey, let's teach in this way. Let's treat each other this way. Let's do this. And it's much more similar to that. It's much more similar to change management, changing human behavior. And it literally uses a different part of our brain. So that's the interesting thing to me, is that if we just put it with IT, we're really putting it in the wrong department, I think.
Yeah. So Finn, I'm gonna pivot over to you, because I know a lot of times, you're a high school student, you're 16, a lot of the people listening are like, oh, Finn's gonna be on our lists, and he's gonna start getting our mail and stuff. So that's exciting for everyone listening. And so I think what's really fun about having you on the podcast is just being able to understand how are your friends and your students using AI right now? Because we've heard everything from, oh, they don't like it because it seems fake, it's not authentic, to they're using it, they're confused, they don't know what they can and can't do. So kind of unpack, how are you and your friends, when you're using AI, what are you really doing with it? And how are you using it? Are you using it to save time, spark ideas, explore, help you learn? Unpack that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are plenty of ways. It really depends on the person. But I think kind of the majority I've seen, and my particular favorite way to use it, I think AI is the best research tool we've had ever. I think it's so incredible. And it really makes me think of the fact that this guy over here, my dad, he always tells me, he loves to tell me actually, and he brags about it, how back when he was in high school, he would go to the library and search through all the books, right? He would go, I don't know how you would do it.
Card catalog, man.
Yeah, those words don't make sense to me. But anyway, it makes me think, it really does seem like this is what I'm going to be I'm going to be telling my kids, oh, I used to have to go through all these Google sites and try and pick out the right information and quote that. And they're gonna be like, what? How did you not use AI to type it in? It really does feel like that, because it's such an incredible tool where you can just type something in, you get almost completely credible information. I know there used to be hallucinations. It's gotten there's been so few lately. And so it's such a great pieces of information all compiled into one. You can ask follow-up questions, which you can't do with Google. And I think that's just been an incredible tool in school. And so while certain people use AI in different ways, most people I've seen have used it in this way.
Okay.
I think for the reason it's so helpful in schools is because while you can use it for things like research projects, it also is very versatile. You can use it in any class you want pretty much, just to get a little bit of extra information on the topic. So like right now in English class, I'm reading The Crucible.
Right.
And it's all about, there's the Salem witch trials, and it's in a Puritan society. And I didn't really know much about the Puritans, so I looked it up on ChatGPT, asked it to tell me a little about them. And I realized next time I got to class and next time I was reading the book, I was putting all these pieces together of, oh, this is what Puritan culture is like, and that's exactly how it's impacting this in the book. And so I came to class sounding a lot smarter, but a lot of it made more sense to me. So I think I've just seen a lot of people using that. I think it's an incredibly helpful tool that way.
That's great. I love that. And I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to set it up, though, because I want to give a nod to your dad, because he'll probably know this song. Back in the day, there was a song called Parents Just Don't Understand. And it was by Will Smith. And one of the things I want to ask is, when you and your friends are talking about AI and you think about parents, you think about adults, you think about people like us that are talking about AI, what is it that just makes you shake your head when you hear them talking about AI or hear them talking about students and AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I really hate is one of the reasons teachers don't use AI, I believe, is because they see an obstacle in having to teach kids how to use AI first.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, to like integrate it into the classroom, these kids have to know how to use AI. But I really think kids honestly do know how to use AI. I know we've experienced a lot of different academic websites, different tools in the past besides ChatGPT, but I think it's such a advantage that we're young because of the fact that our mind hasn't fully formed yet.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to break these like patterns and we don't have to break these patterns that built in the past of like, oh, we have to use this, we can't use ChatGPT. So I think we're very quick to adapt to it. Mm-hmm. I think most kids, even if they don't have a ton of experience using the tools actually, they can still kind of find their way onto it and pretty much figure it out very quickly. Yeah. So when teachers say, oh, we have to teach students how to use AI, it's like kind of shocking. It's like, no, these students know how to use AI. We have to figure out how to use it responsibly.
Well, and I think that's good. And I want to switch back over to Conor on that one, because I think that's one of the things that you often talk about, human skills are going to be even more valuable. I've heard some of your things on LinkedIn, and those are some of the things that I know that you teach about. So things like judgment, creativity, collaboration, those are the types of things that, as a parent, I'm trying to teach my children, judgment, those types of things. Those are things that I, as a responsible parent, need to be teaching them. So which one of those skills stand out the most? That, again, going back to the fact that the teachers don't need to teach them AI, they need to teach them skills in discernment. So let's unpack that for a second.
Yeah, I like the question because I hear a lot. First of all, I just got this the other day about, and I get it often, is this going to destroy creativity on one hand, and then on the other hand, people saying AI can't do creativity. And those things are actually polar opposites. So it's funny sometimes that people are both afraid that AI is going to rule the world and they think AI is nothing. But in that, first of all, in the creativity thing, I think it's interesting because I think AI really helps creativity. However, if you had like 25 people and you said, hey, everybody write a paper on the Crucible or whatever, as Finn was saying, right? Or have 25 people just type that into AI. It'll be different, but it'll be somewhat similar, as opposed to, a student starting off and saying, hey, here's some ideas, now go from there. Then you'll have wildly different answers. So when people say AI can't be creative, I mean, that's true. It can't be creative. You are creative, but what it does is it amplifies creativity. Right. And if we think of creativity as just taking disparate ideas and putting them together in new ways, of course, AI is phenomenal at that. But you have to instruct it to do it. Yeah. So I think I'm not worried about the creativity part really at all. The part that I think is the most important is probably the judgment part. Yeah. Finn was sort of talking about hallucinations and how they're going down, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because in a way, it's a great thing. Of course it is, right? Because it was ludicrous sometimes when you'd read this. When did the Golden Gate Bridge move to Connecticut? It's like, oh, that was 1952, right? And it was just like, you're like, what? And like, if you looked up, oh, what did, this person, what did Bart Kaler write? It'll like give this whole series of books that you're like, I didn't write those books. Right. Anyway, point being that the judgment thing is getting harder and harder. It used to be that teachers could just be like, use this at your peril because it's going to lie and we're going to know that. But now it's almost more dangerous when you have somebody or something that's right almost all the time, right? Because you really start to get lazy on it. And so what I think all the time is, especially in companies, but this really goes for academia as well, let's talk about companies for a second, right? Like if we're talking about like, oh, well, maybe we should like, get rid of this segment of the workforce. I get asked that a lot. Like, how will this impact the workforce? Yes, it will reduce tasks, not jobs, first of all, right? So it's not like it just takes jobs. Jobs are, not monolithic things. They're a series of tasks. But when we think about what happens when AI is coming for graphic design or for, the research and all that kind of stuff, I don't know. I'm skeptical because, like, yes, you'll need fewer of those people, but you definitely need them. Every time you hear something like, oh, we can all be Hollywood directors, I'm like, yeah, you want to see me direct a Hollywood movie with AI? It's going to be garbage. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just because we can do it. Finn's grandfather, my father, is an Irish poet, and I remember in the early days, I would sort of say, oh, Dad, check this out. Like this was, early 2023. And I was like, Dad, I know you're a published Irish poet and, you won all these awards, but watch this. I can be a poet too. And I just had ChatGPT write a poem. And he looks at it and he's sort of sympathetic. He's an old Irish guy. And he's like, yeah, that's trash though, right? I'm like, oh, is it? Like, I'm not a poet, so I don't know. So point being that the most important thing I think in the AI era is our brains, right? Yeah. It's the ability to discern good. It's the ability to sort of like judge what's quality and what's not quality, because AI can come up with a lot of things and there's going to be a lot of great stuff in there. But unless we actually have humans discerning what's good and making that judgment, it's almost a useless tool.
I think that gets back to your AI literacy, because I think people, until the bunny's jumping on the trampoline, everybody's like, oh, I can figure out AI, but it's going to get very, very difficult very fast. And I think that discernment and that ability to say, is that what I think it is? And is that logical? And I think that's going to be one of the big things. And that's one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about looking down the horizon is, are we going to have enough people that are literate enough to understand that this is AI and you're being duped, you're being fooled? So that's one danger. But I guess, Finn, I want to ask you, going back to some of the things your dad talked about, was the idea that, job threats and whether that materializes or not, that's one thing. There, the scary boogeyman that it's going to be like Terminator and take over, those things are out there. People have a lot of misconception about what AI is. And so when you talk to your peers and you guys really get down and start talking about the future, how do you guys see that? Is it like a big scary thing that everybody talks about that could take away jobs? And, why am I going to go into, I hear a lot of people saying, why should I go to college when, plumbers, and I'm looking for careers that are going to be AI proof. And so and we need skilled trades. I'm not trying to discount that by any means, but I'm saying that sometimes people are making decisions based on their fear as opposed to facts. Help me understand how your peers are thinking that through as it relates to the future in AI.
Yeah, well, this is going to sound a little stupid, but when me and my peers think about the future, a lot of it kind of ends at college. It's because we're so focused on high school.
It always is that way.
Much work. Yeah, exactly. I have so much work right now. There can't be anything more than this. The end has to be what college I get into. So now I have to focus all my energy on getting into that good college. And while it kind of is stupid because college helps you get those jobs, we kind of end at college rather than thinking past that into the future. We might know what we want to do when we're older, but we don't really think of, how is AI going to impact that? But I also think part of it is, I think if AI is already replacing jobs right now, by the time we get to the job market, which is however long, by the time we get to that market, most of the jobs are already going to be replaced with AI. A lot of them are going to be replaced. We're going to take the ones that are left over. So in a way, we're going to see them as like safe jobs because they haven't been taken over with AI yet. But who's to say in the future those won't get taken over by AI? And so I think the issue and the reason we're kind of not thinking about this so much, about how AI might take over our future jobs, is we haven't really had any official conversations with adults and with parents. Like the conversations we have with teachers are, grades because of college. And parents are like, where are you going to move when you go to college? Or where are you going to move after that? There's not much like, what's your entire plan until you retire? And so because of that, we also haven't really had talks about, if AI is happening right now, if it's replacing these jobs, how could you maybe learn AI? Because if AI is already being shut out in schools, what's to say it won't be completely shut out of the job market? Yeah. Like, of course, that's not true, but it's kind of what we start to think is, if AI can be shut out here and be like, we don't need AI here, I mean, I don't know. It's one of these things.
Well, and I think that you're wise to think about that, because another thing is there's going to be so many more jobs that it comes out of AI. I mean, just like when the internet came on, we have a lot of jobs now that did not exist before the internet because of the internet. Just like when the automobile was created, there's a lot more jobs around the automobile than there was, blacksmithing. And so I think that's gonna play itself out fine. And we had Mark McCrindle on. He's the leading researcher for Generation Alpha. And I know you're right on that border. You're probably a little bit older, you're still Gen Z, but Generation Alpha, they're planning on, they're predicting that they will have at least 7 or 8 different careers over the course of their lifetimes. Huh. And so it's a whole lot different from, let's say, a boomer that, they sat at one job for 40 years, and that was the loyalty. That's what they did. But it's going to be a different era. So I really like your answer on that, Finn, and I think that's really good. Thank you.
We would love to hear both of your response to this next question. Schools are still largely built around memorization and regurgitation, and those are things that AI can do like that. We'd like to know, how can we rethink the grading and assessment so that students are being rewarded for the kinds of skills that will matter in an AI-driven job market?
Yeah, I think that's all the time we have today. But no, it's one of those really, really hard questions to answer. And it sort of alludes to what Finn was just talking about, which was, you're so incentivized by grades at that stage. And it's understandable because there's a limited supply of, spots in great colleges. And so it makes sense. There's no, I don't want to say the system's broken or something like that. The system is just what the system is. But when we think about how we have to incentivize critical thinking, I think it goes to a couple of things. I mean, number one is helping students understand that there is this moment beyond. Finn and I talk a lot about beyond grades and how it looks from the bottom in high school like a mountain, and it looks like the peak is the ultimate. Kind of as Finn was saying, it looks like there's 2 roads up now, right? There's the gondola, just the easy way up, or there's sort of the hiking up. And why would you ever hike up? You can take a gondola up, unless you realize that at the top of that mountain, it's actually a plateau, and your strength really matters, and all that strength you would have developed kind of coming up the hill. So I think that part of it is really rooted in this idea that critical thinking is going to be the whole point of college, the whole point of getting into everything else, because as you're saying, Bart, there's going to be a lot of different careers. I think that with AI, if you're a critical thinker, you could go into, I don't want to say anything, but a lot of different things. You may not be able to progress. Just because we have the calculator, it's not like everybody can work for NASA now. So it's not like you're going to progress to the upper echelons, but certainly learning on the job with AI is going to be something startlingly different now. So I think on one hand, it's going to be, how do we rethink about incentivizing, young people? But this is where I'd probably turn it over to Finn too, because it's one of these situations where when everything is focused on that, I don't actually know. So this is me sort of passing the buck a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, I love the way my dad just said that about, if you're a critical thinker and you know how to really be a good critical thinker, pretty much wherever you get placed, you're going to know how to do it pretty well. You're going to be able to learn and problem solve and figure out, what does this need? What needs to happen here? How do I excel here? But yeah, as you were saying, those things like memorizing dates and just trying to think of all those things and call back, recall, stuff like that, it is pretty much instantly replaceable with AI. And so it really makes you think, what was the point in doing this in the first place? Because you could, there was Google before that. You could always look things up then. I guess AI makes it a little bit faster. I think what the point of that was in the first place was you're teaching these kids how to think. You're teaching them how to remember things, remember skills. That's also why you have math tests and essays. Essays, you're teaching them how to put concise ideas together. With math tests, you're seeing how well can they solve this problem. Maybe they've learned the basic skills, but they haven't seen this way of putting it together. So they now have to figure out how to go from these basic skills to solving this more advanced problem. And so it really is a lot about just how well they think, how they do, how they go through school, how they act when they're faced with a challenge. And so I think while these smaller, less crucial things now, such as memorization, can start to be replaced, it's crucial that we're making sure, these kids still can learn how to think with AI. Right. And something we've talked about, this is something we've talked about a lot in our house. And we've kind of come up with a bit of a framework. Yeah. Which is, in these three parts of lockdown, hybrid, and transcendent. In the way of lockdown being, as it kind of sounds, like literally no AI at all. You're completely shutting it out. So you're just seeing, oh, how well can the student think? And you do this by, like, let's say you're going into English class, right? You know you have to write an essay, but you know nothing about it. You know what the topic is. Like, you know you're going to be writing about this book. But you receive the prompt, you receive everything you might need to know, all your quotes, in that exact moment while you're walking into the class, and you're writing it down on pen and paper.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, there's really no way to use AI. It just comes down to how well you can think, and it's just you and that pen and paper. Versus something like hybrid, which is starting to use AI, but you're tracking to see how well the student use it goes back and forth. Because there's a huge difference between going in and, let's say, writing a paper about the Industrial Revolution, right? The student could just say, I have this paper due in 10 minutes. Can you just give me the paper?
Right.
I need it to be 3 body paragraphs, specifics. It spits it out. You just copy and paste it and put it in your document and submit it. You're not going to learn much from that compared to what hybrid really should be, which is, so this is what I kind of already have. I know I need to write a paper about the Industrial Revolution. I've come up with these 3 ideas for body paragraphs. I've done this research. Can you help me make this into an outline, or can you help me start to like formulate this in my head, create it into more of a fleshed out thing? Oh, I don't really like this. Maybe this isn't right. So you're really going back and forth with this AI, making sure you're fact checking everything. You're actually doing the thinking, and you're going to come out of it with so much more knowledge about the Industrial Revolution, knowledge on how to put things together. And that's a skill that's just going to be incredibly useful in your future too, if you're like with a task. And then, so I've seen those 2 things kind of a little bit, but something that we've kind of come up with on our own is transcendent. And what transcendent is giving these students a problem that they should never be able to do by themselves, realistically. It's one of these things where the student gets into their test and they put their hands in their head and they're like, what is this?
Right.
But now you're giving them AI to use it. And so like AI to help them on this task. And so what this kind of does is it helps them with a giant problem that they shouldn't be able to do. But now that they're using AI, they have all this access to all this research, all this knowledge that they wouldn't usually have. And I think this is kind of similar to now, or back then, how the calculator was when it first came out. Of course, these students can now do way higher level math because they're not wasting their time doing 35,374 times blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Because that would take a significant amount of time rather than, so they can get to the actual point.
Yeah.
And I think, it's really just teaching them how to think better with AI or without.
Finn, you bring up some really good points that many times I'll kind of bring up in my lectures and my teaching, is the idea that I really do believe liberal arts is going to be kind of the core. I mean, that's my background. I learned how to think in college, and that's where the skill that has brought me the furthest in my life. And so I think that's going to be very critical that we lean into that as educators and that we really promote that. I think that's going to be part of the success. And I think it's also the idea that there's just this idea that I think that sometimes the students are going to be so important in being able to understand and have some agency in the way these things are developed. I mean, I love the fact that you have your dad to be able to bounce those things off to kind of do the lockdown, the hybrid, and the transcendent. I love those 3 different levels. But I think that when I start looking at talking about real AI literacy and what that looks like for the different generations and how they're experiencing, because what you're experiencing, Finn, and what your dad's experiencing, they're different, but they're similar. And so in some ways, I guess it leads to a bigger question, and maybe, Conor, you can start with this, is that if students are the ones living with these changes day to day, especially in the world of academia, I mean, I'm probably asking you to put on your professor hat at NYU at this point, but to understand how much of the voice should they have in helping shape these rules around AI in education? Because, I mean, I go to some schools and I'm like, what's your policy? They're like, well, we let every faculty decide. And I feel so bad for these students because they're like, I don't know if I use AI, if I'm going to get expelled from this class or if I'm going to be required to pass it. I don't know because it's not clear. So speak to that for a second.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges in education, right? Is that especially in higher education, there's faculty have a lot of agency, which makes sense. That happens for a reason, which is why it's interesting to sort of like work a lot with St. Luke's, where we are in New Canaan, in Connecticut, which is this idea that they can have single comprehensive approach where everybody gets on the same page about it. But I agree. I think that it's really disruptive for students to try to figure out, like in each individual class, what this is going to look like. I mean, one of the ways that Finn and I got started on this is Finn's just good at AI, so I was just using him a lot and not crediting him for the first year or so, which worked very, very well for me. But the idea was, super quick story on that. Like when I gave him ChatGPT for the first time, and he's like, "What is this?" Very, very early on, and I was like, "Just figure out how you can use it for school without cheating." And he did this whole thing. He was kind of talking about the Industrial Revolution. He did this whole thing about, creating a German immigrant. Instead of like writing a journal entry for 1940, what would a German immigrant be experiencing? Like he had ChatGPT become a German immigrant, and all of a sudden talk about like experiential learning. Like it's absolutely, it's an extraordinary tool that would probably fall into kind of like that hybrid thing of like, how do you use this to learn differently? But I also have I've done a lot of work in nonprofit, and the idea that you'd go to Africa and build a well in a village without talking to the villagers would be absurd, right? It just like, you just wouldn't do it. It's sort of like an old colonial kind of like way of doing it. And I do find that is a little bit where we are right now, right? I think it's this idea that these conversations around, the bottom rung of the career ladder breaking are very, very real. And they're happening, and they're saying like, look, how are we going to teach kids critical thinking? What are they going to do when they get out of college? All that kind of stuff. And those conversations are almost exclusively happening between parents, teachers, and the technology companies. And so in the same way, like so Finn and I were flying back from Nepal. We did a bunch of work in Nepal, teaching schools and nonprofits. And what he was saying when we were sort of sitting next to each other, because 20-hour flight or something like that, he's like, it's funny that they don't ask me, really. Do you know what I mean? Like they sort of, and I was like, I think it's because they think high schoolers are still sort of kids. And Bart, you're a parent, and Troy, I'm not sure, but this idea that when you have kids, you kind of think of them as young. And next thing you know, you turn around and they're, paddling 128 miles down the Allagash River in Maine by themselves. And you're like, oh, this is not a child anymore. And they can actually have, insightful ideas about things and things like that. So I just think that this has to include the people who are actually going to be affected by this job market should be a part of this conversation, because it's their jobs at risk.
Yeah. And I'm going to add to that, not only for students, but I'm going to also add for, if you're a president or administrator and you are looking to develop AI for your institution, engage those who are also going to be the ones doing it. And I'm sure you're seeing this in corporations too, where it's like, hey, this edict comes down from on high, and everybody's going to use Copilot now from here on, from eternity. So, right. But there's no training, there's no literacy set up for that, other than just that, hey, here's the help desk if you have any questions. And
I'm glad you bring that up too, because so the data shows us, and we kind of found this empirically, but then McKinsey came out with data on this too. In terms of driving adoption, whether it's, and I'll just kind of talk about corporations for a second, but you'll see the parallel in 1 second, which is the single biggest driver for adoption has nothing to do with the typical digital maturity of a corporation or something, right? So like you have low digital maturity in, industrials or whatever, and very high in a small marketing firm. You can imagine why, right? And there's certain schools which may be a little more traditional, some which may be a little more advanced in tech and things like that. But we found that the single biggest driver was whether the CEO was really using this technology themselves, very personally. Like your CEO spills coffee on their keyboard, are they taking out ChatGPT and trying to figure out how to mop that up, right? That level. And I would say that it's the same for university for university presidents. And the reason is that unless those people at the top of the organization truly know what it feels like to use it and to be dependent, I'm using sort of loosely, but really, like, not just in your personal life, not just in your professional life, but like everything, just in every aspect of your day, how it can be helpful. They'll never quite understand how it can transform everything across everything. I get asked every once in a while, like, oh, how's marketing going to change in the MBA program? I'm like, I don't think it should. Like, we still have to learn marketing. Yeah. So, but what does it mean for that marketing class and that marketing professor? And unless the people at the top of the organization who are drawing up these mandates and saying, hey, we should all use them, unless they deeply understand what it means to feel that, then they'll never understand why this applies to everybody. So people who aren't using it are very often like, okay, so which teams should learn this? And I'm like, what? Which teams should have electricity? Like, what do you mean which teams should learn this? Like, which teams shouldn't? Who do you want to leave out of this? Because it's so it's such a powerful democratizing tool, but importantly, it's not about telling people how to use it, to your point, right? It's about empowering them to do it and then letting them go. Now, the problem is with when you have faculty who are giving sort of misleading edicts to students, that can be problematic. But the idea is there, which is everybody has to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing too. I just want to touch on that a little bit, because I think that we've got to remember. You said it earlier in the conversation. I just want to pull it back up for everybody to realize is that this is something that is not supposed to make you more efficient, although it will at the beginning, but it's supposed to enhance your subject matter expertise. Right. So you think about everybody on your team. How can you, and I've got these little stickers made up, prompting is my superpower. And so awesome. How can you actually, and I use the analogy of Tony Stark. Tony Stark can probably throw a decent punch, but when he climbs into the Iron Man suit, he becomes a superhero. Yeah. And so that's the idea, that if I can turn my entire administrative team, my employees, my students, whatever, if I can turn them into superpowers because of the fact that they've been enhanced in their subject matter expertise, I think that's such a phenomenal thing. And it's only going to happen if the leaders understand how to do it and how it's transformed them into superpowers as well.
Well, it's what we saw early on, right? Which is certainly early on dealing with faculty and everybody else in other universities. You're completely sympathetic, and Finn was kind of alluding to this earlier. But sort of when a teacher already knows that they're great, like you'll have the professor of the year, and they'll be like, "I got this. I don't need AI. I totally understand why it would enhance my subject expertise, but what more do I need to learn? I have a PhD, et cetera." But then when you can turn it into an experiential superpower as well, it's really amazing. I mean, when you think about why teachers have, you have 25 students in the class. Why doesn't that teacher teach biology differently to every single one of those students? Because they don't have the time. They can't read the minds of the students, et cetera, et cetera. But is it possible that suddenly we have a tool that does? And so I love this Tony Stark analogy, because you could be the best teacher in the world. But I'm like, if you're the best teacher in the world, then some kind of passion drove you to be the best teacher in the world. Mm-hmm. And shouldn't that same passion be driving you to like, oh my gosh, like I can now use this and actually get into the heads of everybody I'm working with? It's sort of an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah.
Finn, we're going to go back to a point that your father made and take some of his advice. So if schools actually ask students to help shape AI policy, what kinds of rules or guidelines do you think your peers would push for?
Yeah, it's a great point. Oh, it's a great question. Students know we need to learn. Like, we know, I think, that if we just use AI for everything, we're not going to ever learn to think. We're just going to become robots ourselves. And I think sometimes it's hard to see that students know that. And sometimes maybe students don't fully acknowledge that, but we all kind of know it in the back of our minds. And so I do think that if we are presented with the opportunity, if we do, like if the teachers put that trust in us, there's a saying that like people live up to the trust you put in them or what you think of them. And I think if teachers do allow students to start to be able to use AI and have a say in the conversation, we are going to start to have to think about this in a more mature way of, what should we be using this for? Because right now, with no access to it and basically no say in the conversation, people just try and get around whatever the teachers say. There's a direct clash. But I think, so if a teacher says, "Oh, we want you to think critically," the teacher or the students aren't going to be like, "Oh, I need to think critically, so I'm not going to use AI." It's going to be like, "I want this good grade, so I'm going to probably use AI here."
Right.
But I think if students are involved in the conversation, they're going to start to think, "Oh, maybe we do need to actually put some guidelines on it." And so I think probably some of the guidelines that they would put is probably not just copying and pasting, but actually really, checking back and forth between the AI, making sure that we are doing work in this project. So just basic regulation rules of like making sure we actually are doing work. But yeah, I kind of just want to shout out my school, St. Luke's, real quickly in Connecticut, just because I think they are kind of helping students start to be a part of this. They're hosting like groups where students can come and say what they like about AI, what they don't like about AI, how maybe we should use it. And I think I've seen a lot of students kind of live up to that trust and live up to that challenge. And I'm seeing them start to take responsibility, which is why I say all these things. But I think, if we do give them some control, they will start to put rules in place, such as, maybe we shouldn't be using this for everything. Maybe there's certain classes where we shouldn't be. I haven't seen a lot of kids implement it into more of the STEM classes, such as math and science, because that's more test-based. So they're like, maybe we should stay away from that because maybe there is opportunity, maybe there isn't, but it's better to make sure we're getting tests on the actual subject material rather than just using AI for it.
Just a little bit of a behind the scenes with all that, because as you were talking, I was on Perplexity looking up like what's the mascot at St. Luke's, so I could kind of do a shout out. And then I got one. I was like, that's not the town they talked about. And then I was like, how many other St. Luke's are in Connecticut? 7. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to get to that fast enough. So we'll just leave it at shout out to St. Luke's right now. So, but hey, I wanted to kind of go to tease it out a little bit too. When we talk about the idea of this compliance mindset, the idea there's rules and bans and punishments, and let's talk about both academia as well as corporate, because I think it exists there too. You talk a lot, Conor, about the idea of collaboration mindset as opposed to this idea of compliance. So what does that shift look like in practice? And again, across the board, just in general, whether it's administrative work at higher ed, whether it's in corporations, whether it's with students in academia, how do we make that transition to move from that compliance to that collaboration mindset?
Yeah, it's. I think it's tough, right? Because I think a lot of these things have to start with compliance, and sort of like how, as Finn is talking about, in the beginning, you have to set guidelines in place, make sure that people aren't cheating, and we're sort of the Wild West as we remember back in 2023. But then eventually, students are sort of like, well, wait a minute, I think we actually really need these skills. So how are we going to get these skills if it's just, sort of like rule-based rather than collaborative? And I think what I've found is that the single best way of using AI is in a collaborative way. Now that sort of obviously sounds incredibly simplistic and kind of like cliche, but I want to put more meat on that by saying I get to work with Microsoft a bunch on this kind of work. And what we talk about is if you can actually treat it like a teammate, the results are much better. And what I mean by that very literally is that this is a software that behaves like a human. It's not a human. We know it's not a human, but there's pretty much no daylight between how you would talk to a person and how you'd talk to AI. If you were just texting, you wouldn't necessarily know if you were talking to a person or a human. And part of the interesting thing about that to me is that these tools sort of learn like humans learn, right? People say, oh, it's a statistical probability machine predicting the next word. I'm like, yeah, man, so are we, right? I mean, like if you sort of say like, if I do this in large crowds sometimes to sort of prove the point, I say like, okay, finish the sentence. I think, therefore I, and everybody shouts out am, right? I'm like, right, because there was probably a 99.99% percentage chance that was going to be the next word. The cat in the, et cetera, right? Yep. So, in the same way, if you said like, oh, the apple, there's a certain percentage that it's, tree or CEO or pi or something, but those are statistical probabilities. It's the same way we talk, right? So that's why it really behaves like a human, because it kind of learned like a human. So why is that so important? It's important because, Bart, you said something earlier that I also love this idea of, I've said a lot, I've kind of gotten in trouble for it, but I think that liberal arts majors are going to rule the world, like in AI, because this is a relationship-based thing. This is something where if you are good at talking to somebody, there's no daylight between how you prompt and how you talk to a machine, or talk to this particular machine. Sometimes we sort of say, like we call it TARC when we do this for my company, which is task, add context, refine, and chain. Meaning, like, if you just think about how you talk to a person, you're very clear in your task, right? Let's say you have a new person. How do you best do this? Or instructionally with a student, very, very clear in your task. You really lay it out. Be very, very explicit about what you want. And then you give them context. Hey, here's the book. Here's the lesson. Or in the corporate world, hey, here's what you need to know about the client. But you give them information. And then they come back and you refine the work with them, right? You're like, okay, that was pretty good. This part wasn't good. And then chain, meaning like you give them the next task, assignment, whatever it might be. Exactly the same with ChatGPT. It's funny because in the early days, there are all these tips and tricks about like, oh, if you offer to prompt it or tip it $200, it'll give you a better answer. I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But the point is, when I talk to this thing, I talk to it very conversationally. Like I would say hi, not because it gives me a better answer, but because it keeps me thinking about this as a conversation. And as Finn was sort of saying early in the conversation, like it's iterative. It's not like Google. It's not like you get a response and then you walk away from it. It's a conversation back and forth, and that's how you use it best. So when we talk about compliance versus kind of collaboration, it's more than just sort of like, oh, should we work together or should we just tell people? It's like, no. How do you interact with humans? Start there, because you don't start with humans being like, talk to each other like this and like this. It's really not just sort of like the best practice. It's also the best way of getting the best results out of it as well.
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the tips I always give people. It's like, I've heard people say, why do you say please and thank you to it, Bart?
Right.
And there's research that shows that it gets me in the right mindset. And
Yes,
so I've just gotten a lot of a habit of doing that. And then the other thing I always tell people, it's like, and this is the free tip for everybody listening, have it ask you questions.
Yeah, I love it.
Get in there, and that's going to force you to start treating it like a person or a collaborator, just like you would if you were assigning a task to somebody. You would say, "Do you have any questions for me?"
Right,
And,
exactly.
And that's the way it works, because that's the way we work in life. So,
Yeah.
Troy, I'm going to let you take it here.
Yes. Conor, we would like for you to walk us through the 3-tier framework for AI and learning. And after you go through the tiers, why does each tier matter?
Yeah, so early on when we were teaching this framework for companies and things like that, it was like, okay, what's easy use cases to advanced use cases and things like that, right? And what we found was that there's not really an easy use case and an advanced use case. You know what I mean? Like it can tell you about string theory, but it might mess up how many R's are in the word strawberry, that kind of thing. So what we realized very early on, and what I realized at NYU is, it has to be sort of like in the flow of work. So I call it like learn, execute, strategize. And just the idea is, what do you do at work? You know what I mean? Like you have to like learn things. You have to learn to communicate. You have to sort of like figure out how you're going to execute on plans and how you're going to get work done. And you have to figure out how you're going to create entirely new programs and projects and things like that. And then sometimes you just have to get a lot of stuff done. And so the way we break it down in terms of like a learn, execute, strategize is very much like, where are we flawed? Where do we fall down? So for example, in decision making, right? So of course, we all know a use case is this can help you make decisions, because like that's some questions. Yes, absolutely. But that's not how I think about it. The way I think about it is, why are we flawed decision makers in the first place? We're flawed decision makers essentially because we tend to have a cognitive bias toward one thing over another. Yeah. And why do we have that? We have that because if you're sort of trying to pitch 2 ideas or something like that, you will instinctively give more weight to the one you understand more, because if people ask you follow-up questions, you don't want to sound stupid, right? So it kind of comes down to these very human things around, why do we say no stupid questions? We say no stupid questions because people won't ask them. And why won't they ask them? They won't ask them because they don't want to look stupid in front of their peers. Why is that? Because we're social animals. So I don't mean to take it down all the way to first principles, but in a way you sort of have to, right? And all that kind of like trails back up to, why are we flawed decision makers? Because we give more weight to something so that ultimately we're social animals and we don't want to look stupid. So all that is to say that in this sort of like, subset of the framework, for example, just to kind of give you an example, this can help you sort of say, hey, I'm trying to, decide between these 2 things, but I really understand this one more than this one. Help me get, them level. If you can imagine a balance, help me get to sort of like where I understand them both equally. So again, it's not about a use case about, oh, help me negotiate or something like that. It's this. In the same way, like you could use that as a negotiation tool, right? Why are we bad negotiators? Because it gets our blood pressure racing, because we don't want to look dumb, and we think we have like, scarcity mentality and all that. It all comes back to how we think. And what this does is it can give you reps to keep, practice negotiating so that you are more comfortable, and so that you are eventually going to have a better, you're going to have a better situation when you are talking to somebody. Point being that this is where this all figures into like the brain, how we think, and then ultimately how ChatGPT and other tools like this can help us think through things better, not just in coming up with random use cases.
Conor, I love that. And I'm going to flip over back to Finn here for our very last question, because we're talking a lot about how do we think about things, how do we approach it, how do we as organizations start to frame the way that we think about AI. And so one of the things I know in our work in higher education and marketing, and just my consulting work that I'm doing with a lot of presidents and administrators, is that they've got to figure out what are they going to do with this thing called AI. And so Finn, I know a lot of people that are listening to this would probably love to hear your answer on this. And so when you start looking at colleges here in the next year or 2, what are you going to be looking for when it relates to AI? What's something that when you talk to a school and you might ask a question and how they respond could make a difference? What are those types of questions or thoughts you might be thinking about, or your peers might be wondering?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think specifically right now, this is going to sound a little dumb, but I'm looking for, right at this moment, I'm looking for colleges who actually use AI. But I think in the future, when I go to college in 2 years, I think I'm going to be now or then looking more for colleges who really help prepare me for my future using AI. So not only are they helping me they're using AI to help me with my projects right then and there, but they're also helping me think through the future with AI. When they're giving me examples of things work I might be doing in the future and projects I might be doing in the future, they're like, oh, this is how you could use AI to do this. So I'm building not only the fundamental skills, but I'm actually really learning how to use it in everyday life and in whatever work I want to go into. So I would love to see something with colleges around the fact that it's clear. We've talked about it in this interview. We've talked about it outside. Everyone has been talking about how AI is replacing jobs. And so, yes, by the time I get to college, even now it's a little scary. And so I would love to see really preparing you for a job market that might be run partially by AI, and really so something more transformative rather than trying to hold on to the old ways as long as possible.
That's great. I love that. Thank you.
Yes. That was a wonderful response. We'd like to ask our guests to give a piece of advice at the end of every conversation. And I have a question for each of you. So Conor, what's one shift schools could make tomorrow that would meaningfully change how AI is integrated into education?
I really think that it's this idea of putting the problem on the table between teachers and students. I think right now, one of the things that Finn talks about a lot and you and I talk about a lot is AI at the moment still feels like a little bit of a weapon. It feels like a little bit of, okay, how are students going to use it? How should teachers use it? We all have to be careful. But what if we just put it on the table and had an open conversation saying, listen, these are the skills you guys are going to need. Our job is to teach you. We understand we have to do this. We also understand that, you have to learn these skills outside of AI too. Can we just talk about and get on the same page about what we should be doing together and how we should be using it? And I think it could just start with that conversation.
Thank you. And Finn, if you could send one message to educators or policymakers about AI, what would you want them to hear from a student's perspective?
I would say trust your students. And I know that sounds bad. It's like, oh, these students they're going to use it to cheat. But students will really live up to the amount of trust you give them. And so I think if you are including them into this conversation, if you're putting yourself on the same side as them, because right now it might seem you're on two different sides. The teacher is trying to block everything. Students are trying to find their way around it. If the teacher really goes down and puts themselves on the student's side, the students are going to really respect that. They're going to start to actually really work with the teacher. And I think it's going to just be the best case scenario for both parties.
Yeah, that's great.
That was wonderful, Finn. We have been talking to Conor and Finn Grennan. And if someone would like to reach out to either one of you, I guess first, Conor, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, I think, I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way. I'm dragging Finn onto LinkedIn as well soon, just because there's such a wealth of information. Yeah. It's sort of our favorite platform. I think it's how we all connected originally too. Mm-hmm. So much information, but yeah, please feel free to come find us and hopefully Finn shortly on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. We thank you both for the insight about AI, both from a person that has many fans like you, Conor, but a student's perspective, and you represented students very well, Finn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
You're welcome. Bart, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, this has just been such a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it, Conor and Finn. It's been fun. It's been interesting. It's the first time that we've kind of done an episode like this, so it's a lot of it brings me a lot of joy. But I just think that there's so many really good things that have said, and I don't want to spend a lot of time summarizing everything, other than the fact that you've got to keep in mind these are changing times, and you cannot put your head in the sand any longer. And if you're like any of the people that I meet with and train, and I ask the question, who's using it, who's not, and I always have some people in the back with their arms crossed with the grumpy look, you really need to kind of look beyond your fear and really understand it And I think literacy is where it starts. And so I think there's some great resources that Conor has on the AI Mindset site that you can go look at. I know I've got some great resources on the Higher Ed Marketer and Kaler Solutions. And so if you need help, reach out and ask, because I think there's plenty of people that want to really see schools succeed in this. And so, again, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate the time today. And Troy, thank you as always.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
To our audience, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Higher Ed Marketer. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with your colleague and follow us on LinkedIn at The Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We'll see you next week with another great conversation.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.